Welcome to Hidden History, Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host, Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Keith. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. It looks like we've got a guest on location today. So why don't you introduce him for us, Ray?
Yeah, our guest is the X10 Graphite Reactor at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and we're being brought there through the courtesy of Jacob Cornell. And Jacob, I will not do a good job of introducing you. I'm proud to see a young man that has such an interest in our history, but I'd rather let you talk a little bit about your background than for me to mess it up. So tell us how you got to be where you are in the Oak Ridge National Laboratory.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, both of you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
So, well, it really starts back in Illinois, I guess, when I was just a country kid. And I guess I got lost on the way to college and found myself on a nuclear submarine uh, about 20 years old. So the
What
Navy,
submarine? Which one was you on?
I was on the USS Greenville, so East Tennessee Pride.
Yeah, well, we're bringing the USS Houston sail. We're going to bring it here to Oak Ridge next year. So,
I had heard about that.
yeah, we'll get you involved with that.
I'm really excited to see it. I love seeing a submarine sail.
Yeah.
So then after the Navy, I came here to Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I've been here for a few years. Started off making plutonium in the isotopes program. So we make plutonium for NASA. And then I shifted over a little bit more to the design side. So I don't handle materials much anymore. And then I heard that Bill Cabbage was retiring, who
Yeah.
a legend at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. He's been here for a long time in the communications directorate. And he gives a lot of these tours of the graphite reactor. And they said, well, Bill's going to be retiring, and we'd love to have someone, learn from him before he retires, take up the mantle. And so I thought, oh, this is perfect. I love history. I love reactors. I wrote up this really nice email. Here's my experience. Here's exactly why you should pick me. And to be honest, I think they were just excited that someone responded. But here I am. I love giving these.
Us historians have a hard time finding replacements.
Yeah.
It's not always easy to find someone who's really interested in it. And seriously, you can make an assignment to someone and they'll do what you tell them to. But if you can get somebody who's interested in it inherently, just intrinsically wants to be a historian, we're delighted. So
Yeah.
I can see why they responded positively to your email.
Yeah, for sure. And then they seem to really like my tours. I mean, myself think they're maybe mediocre, so maybe they're just grooming me to stay here for a really long time. But I'm thrilled to do stuff like this and give lots of tours.
All right, good. Well, we're so glad to have you as a guest here today. So tell us what you've prepared for us.
Yeah, for sure. And sorry if the lighting is a little bit weird. I'm in the graphite reactor building, so it's a little bit hard to get it all set up. So for the most part, I'll just talk to you. But at some point, I will walk you around a little bit. I've practiced switching to the phone, so hopefully that transition is smooth. Is it okay if I tell a little bit of the backstory before we get to the graphite reactor?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, so some of the buildup to the graphite reactor is important science history and world history. So really what we're building to is this, which is the world's first continuously operating reactor plant. So this is 1943, but if we go back to the 30s and really even before that, so if it's okay, I'd like to go back to the 1800s even. We'll make it brief.
Absolutely. Do it. You bet.
So we used to think that atoms were the smallest building block of everything. There was nothing smaller. They weren't made of anything themselves. Actually, the word atom, I think, is Greek, meaning cannot be divided. Until in 1897, J.J. Thomson, who was messing with cathode ray tubes, if you remember those old heavy TVs, CRT TVs, cathode ray. So we used to think that, well, cathode rays were like a laboratory magic trick, basically. We thought it was like just energy going through the ether. And J.J. Thomson in 1897 found that you could deflect them with magnets. He did some more experiments. Turns out they were electrons. It was just a steady beam of electrons. And that really is the first time that we realized atoms themselves are made up of smaller particles. But we just kind of thought it was a positively charged ball with some electrons in it. We didn't know that it was like electrons orbiting a nucleus until Ernest Rutherford in 1911 discovered the nucleus. So he found that almost all of the mass of an atom is in the middle. That's where the protons are, and it's just tiny electrons floating around the outside. And basically everything we'd done for thousands of years was only messing with the electrons, from making bread to the glass on the screen you're looking at right now. That's all just the electrons interacting with atoms nearby. We'd never really reached all the way into the nucleus, and now we were starting to. But there was still a missing piece. So we knew the electrons were on the outside. There was a very tiny center nucleus with protons, but the mass, the weight didn't add up. There was still a missing piece. And we finally came to that in 1932. James Chadwick discovered the neutron. And so that really was the last puzzle piece to the atom as we know it today. I mean, really nerdy physicists will tell you there's even smaller things, but generally speaking, it's electrons, protons, and neutrons. Well, neutrons were really important because we said the nucleus is positively charged and the electrons are negatively charged. So a lot of times whenever something tries to get towards the nucleus, let's say it's like literally a projectile floating through space and tries to get to the nucleus, well, the magnetism of the electrons and protons pushes it away. So you can't really get down to the nucleus. Once we discover the neutron, which has no charge, we can shoot that and hit a nucleus much more easily because there's nothing to repel it. So scientists, a lot of times, hey, no one's done this thing, let's do it. So they're hitting all kinds of different elements and atoms and stuff with all these particles, especially neutrons now that we discovered them in 32. Well, that takes us to Berlin, Germany, 1938, when Otto Hahn hit uranium with a neutron. Okay, so if you take a neutron and you hit a nucleus with it, you'd think, well, now the nucleus is one neutron heavier. And it may be radioactive now because it's unstable, or it could still be stable. But either way, you have the same thing you had before, but with one more neutron. Well, Otto Hahn found barium, which is much lighter. And he's like, this doesn't make sense. How do I add something to it and now I get something smaller? So he sent his, a lot of times scientists are either experimental or theoretical. They're often not both. He was experimental, and so he sent his research data to Lisa Meitner, who was in Stockholm at the time. And she said, I think, based on Bohr's model of the atom, you actually split the atom in two. We'd never really discovered this before. This is what we call fission. So this is really what we built the entire nuclear age on is fission and radioactivity. And so we said a neutron comes in and hits a nucleus of uranium and it splits. Well, when it splits, it releases a lot of energy, which we could harness as heat or explosives or something like that. But curiously, it also releases a few more neutrons. So a neutron caused it and releases more neutrons. So you can see if there was another uranium nearby, those new neutrons could hit that and cause that to fission. And you get this chain reaction where it releases neutrons, which cause more. So we figured we could do a chain reaction and harness this, probably to get heat, to have a very powerful source of heat. Maybe for bombs. A lot of scientists at the time didn't think that you could get a bomb because it'd just be too heavy. It's something you couldn't deliver to a target. And so that takes us to December 1942. We're almost to the graphite reactor, I promise.
I hear you.
So we're December 2nd, 1942, when we started the world's first chain reaction of fission, the world's first reactor in Chicago. This is Enrico Fermi, and he proved the chain reaction can happen. So December 1942, they started the world's first reactor. In February of the next year, we broke ground on the graphite reactor at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which at the time didn't exist. This is really the start of Oak Ridge National Laboratory. At the time, it was called Clinton Engineering Works. And so it's only 3 months after Enrico Fermi proves it can happen, and we've started building the world's first.
And I might add, in 9 months, it was completed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent point. It just shows the extreme speed with which we had to tackle this problem. So the whole point, right?
Today in 9 months, you couldn't get somebody to agree to build it.
I know, yeah.
I
I
know.
couldn't
That's something that we're dealing with in Oak Ridge right now. The Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, has asked us to do a Manhattan Project 2.0. And to do that, we've got to convince people, look, we built the world's first nuclear reactor in 9 months. Now, we've already been talking about this Manhattan Project 2.0 for a couple of months at least, maybe more. And you got to get started. I mean, we've got to get going if we're really going to do something on the scale of what was done in 1943.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we need another General Groves.
That's exactly what we need. A good, strong leader. You bet.
Yeah, I mean, the scientists trying to figure out what design to do here and at Hanford, Washington for their reactors, they couldn't come to a consensus. And General Leslie Groves, leading the Manhattan Project at the time, he went to him in Chicago and said, "You have 1 week," and that sort of forced their hand to come to an agreement. No one could agree on what was best, but when you have a timeline, when there's a war to win, I mean, you just had to make a decision.
You know, his grandson, Dick Groves, told me that General Groves would allow himself only 1 hour to make the most difficult decision.
Wow.
We don't have anybody like General Groves today, but that's
Um,
exactly what we need. Somebody who can decide and make things happen.
You
yep.
know, and I think that comes from that generation because I remember when I was growing up, and I don't remember who's told me this, some older, wiser gentleman who said, if you can't make a decision, a major life decision in 24 hours, you're not a man.
Yeah.
So he said every adult man should be able to make a decision, a major decision within 24 hours. So
Yeah.
I guess Groves took it to the extreme.
He did
Yeah,
take
right.
it to the extreme. Yeah.
Sure.
Keith, that reminds me of what the old saying is, let's sleep on it.
Yeah,
That
that's,
by in the morning, we're going to decide.
that's right.
Yep.
All
Well,
right. Sorry, Jake. Go ahead.
no, that's good. That's excellent. I mean, it goes to show too that if you put all the right people in place, then every option presented to you is probably a good option. So even if you pick the worst of them, it's still an excellent choice.
Real good. Right. Good point.
So so we get here and we still haven't answered the question of why is this thing here? So in the Manhattan Project, we were trying to build a nuclear bomb, the first atomic weapon. And so that fission that I talked about releases energy. And so if we can control it, then we can just have a source of heat. But if it's a very rapid, I say uncontrolled, but in reality, it was carefully controlled, but like exponential chain reaction, then you get a bomb. And so we knew that uranium would fission and release that energy. But we were reproducing some of Otto Hahn's experiments in California, and Glenn Seaborg discovered that, well, when you mine uranium out of the ground, most of it has too many neutrons, it won't fission. You hit it with a neutron and it just absorbs a neutron, but it doesn't split. About 99% of it won't fission. Only less than 1% will fission, what we call uranium 235. Adding up the protons and the neutrons, you get 235. So we thought we can make a uranium bomb by enriching uranium 235, which is what some of the other plants here in Oak Ridge did. But whenever Glenn Seaborg was hitting uranium with neutrons, he found that that uranium 238 that won't fission sometimes turns into a new element that's not found anywhere on Earth, plutonium. You can create plutonium by adding a neutron in, and then it decays into plutonium. And plutonium fissions as well. So we're like, we could make a uranium bomb or a plutonium bomb because they both fission. And as indecisive as we just talked about, the scientists being, they said, let's try both.
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't really know if either one will work. And it's important to winning the war. We think Germany might be working on this same stuff. So let's tackle both. So that's how we get here to the X10 graphite reactor, where the whole point was to make plutonium. Now, in reality, the amount of plutonium that we needed to make a bomb was a huge amount. 7 kilograms, something like a small bowling ball. And so for that, we needed huge reactors. And we decided not to build them here in Oak Ridge. Those were going to be built on the Columbia River in Washington State at what we call the Hanford site. But we contracted DuPont Chemical Company to build the thing. And they said, we want a pilot plant. We want you to build a smaller version of the same reactors we're going to build, but you're going to build it quickly. It's going to get operational, and we're going to teach everyone about the reactors before the Hanford ones come online. So like you said, 9 months later, it turned on. So we turned the X10 graphite reactor on for the first time November 4th of 1943, and we'll get to that event as well. And the Hanford reactors didn't come online until September of the next year. So by the time Hanford came online, we'd already trained their reactor operators how to control a reactor. We taught the chemists how do you separate plutonium and handle it. We taught, everything about this had already been tested. So when Hanford came online, they hit the ground running and could make the huge amounts of plutonium needed for the bomb. So like we were talking about in November of 1943, we're going to turn this on for the first time. So I'll talk to you about the construction a little bit. We can see all these holes. It might be hard to see. I'll show you. I'll come up closer.
We got them. Yeah, we can see them.
So those tubes, there's 1,200 roughly tubes that go all the way through the reactor. Inside the reactor is where the fission reaction happens. And so we would load these uranium slugs. They were 4 inches long and about 1 inch in diameter, as you can see. We'd put them into an aluminum can, so they're all contained, and then we push them into those tubes. Now that reactor is 24 foot thick of concrete, and it's shielded by 7 foot of, it's 24 foot of graphite and shielded by 7 foot of concrete. So when it was operating, I could stand here and I would not be harmed by the radiation because all that concrete, 7 foot of concrete, would protect me from the radiation. So we need to fill up that 24 foot tube in the graphite with uranium slugs. So they would just push slugs in and keep pushing them in until it was full. They'd calculate, how many do we need to be 24 foot in? And then they move on to the next tube. And actually, I'll show you, there was an elevator there. And so it would take them up to the next row, the next row, the next row. Now, once you get enough uranium in one spot, the fission reaction is spontaneous. And so we want to control that. We don't want it to just turn on when the guy puts the last slug in. So to control that, we need to not have loose electrons flying around causing fission. And so we put material into the reactor that soaks up all those neutrons. So the fission reaction, the chain reaction, won't occur until we take that neutron absorbing material out and allow the neutrons to hit uranium. So what we used was cadmium and boron, just because those absorb neutrons a lot. We had some rods that went in the top. So we're looking at the side, well, I guess we'll call this front to back tubes where the fuel went. But in the top, they had top to bottom tubes where they put rods in that had cadmium. They also had some side to side tubes where they put rods in that had boron. And so after the operators put enough uranium in, then we would slowly pull those rods out to carefully get the chain reaction going, and then carefully control how much of that chain reaction was happening so that we didn't melt anything in the reactor. The lowest melting component was the aluminum that held the uranium. So as long as we kept the aluminum from melting, we knew that power was under the limits that we had. So November 3rd, 1943, we're starting to load this thing up to turn it on for the first time. And we know it's going to turn on the very next morning. And so, the lab director and all the big wigs were going to be here. Well, we're monitoring all the neutrons in here as we're loading it up. And we realized sometime in the middle of the night, it's going to turn on a little bit before we expected. And the lab director is going to be pretty ticked off if we turn on the world's first reactor plant and he's not here. So there's a mural that I'd love to show you in a little bit, showing one of the workers in the middle of the night going into town to wake up all the bigwigs. Now on the mural, it shows, a car in the mud, because really this whole town was just farming communities and really rural before the Manhattan Project. And it became a huge construction project. And if you've ever been to a construction site, when it's dry, it is dust everywhere. And when it's wet, it's mud everywhere. And so that's pretty accurate about that mural. This was pretty much a city of mud. And actually, to this day, the East Tennessee Economic Council gives out their Muddy Boot Award to people who make a positive contribution in the community as an homage to the city of mud. We were the secret city, but we're kind of the city of mud too. But what's not necessarily accurate about the mural is it shows the bigwigs living in one of the small houses. And probably the bigwigs at the time were not living in the huts in the mud. They would have been at the bougie hotel downtown, or a lot of the administrators and stuff lived on what they called Nob Hill. Of course, a lot of people in town called it Snob Hill because the bigwigs lived there. Coincidentally, my ex.
Knobs, what it was called.
Yeah. And so they woke up the big wigs, they brought them in, and we turned on the reactor at 5 a.m. on November 4th, 1943. And so that's the world's first reactor. Remember, I told you it was in Chicago, but that only operated for 28 minutes, and it produced produced about half a watt. So, I mean, maybe could light a dim light bulb. This is the world's first fully built, continuously operating reactor plant that started out at about 1,000 kilowatts or 1 megawatt when it operated. Now it's air cooled, and so it draws air in, and then the air goes through the tubes. Remember, I told you the most limiting component is the aluminum on the uranium slug, like the can holding the uranium. And so we need to keep that cool. So the air goes through each tube around the aluminum to keep it cool. Because it's the world's first reactor, we weren't 100% sure about all the physics of it. And so some things were actually over-designed, and we found it was over-designed enough that within a year, we upgraded the power from 1,000 kilowatts to about 4,000 kilowatts. But because it's air-cooled, that means we can actually do more power in the winter than in the summer because it's literally cooled by outside air. So I think it reached about 4,100 kilowatts in the winter and about 3,600 in the summer, depending on the heat outside. Now,
and you might say it operated continually for 20 years.
It did, absolutely. So it shut down for the final time November 4th to the day, 1963. So 20 years to the day, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Now, remember, the whole point of this. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Ray, that kind of reminds me, and I can't remember his name. I interviewed him a couple of times, actually, but one for Secret City, the Oak Ridge Story, the war years. What was his name? He was there when it first went critical. He lived up on, what was it? Was it George something?
I can't get it.
Anyway, I interviewed him a couple of times, but he was one of the workers that was actually there when it first went critical. I guess that when they sent the guy out to get the big wigs, you know. So anyway, so awesome. I thought you might remember, Ray.
I'm sorry, I can't remember. I'm sure you did, but I don't remember who it was.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's an excellent point too. As we were talking about at the beginning, hard to find historians. I really appreciated hearing from Bill Cabbage, who interviewed a lot of the people who were here, just like you said you did. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, because we're now coming up on the 82nd birthday, I think, of this, not a lot of those people are around anymore. So I only hear stories of stories.
Right.
True.
Well, if you remember the whole point of this, we're talking about making plutonium. And so probably none of the plutonium made here went into the bomb because we really didn't make enough. It was only a small pilot plant, Hanford, Washington. We helped them hit the ground running. We did a lot of materials testing. We did a lot of training. We did a lot of the groundwork so that they could hit the ground running and really get plutonium at production levels. But to get the plutonium out, the small amounts that we did make, remember I said these tubes go all the way through, and so they're actually open on the back. So we'd load it up with uranium. We would slowly pull those control rods out to allow the chain reaction to go. And then after it had run for a while, we would put the rods back in, which turns off the reactor. Basically, it stops the chain reaction. And then these guys would get back up here and they'd push those rods all the way out. And so those little 4-inch cans of uranium would fall out the backside into a man-made creek. Then we'd fish them over to the building next door where they would dissolve the aluminum off with acid, and then they would do all their chemical processes to get the plutonium out. We created plutonium in this reactor, that isn't found anywhere on Earth. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to have to skip a lot of very interesting and important World War II history, but we get to August of 1945, and we dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Japan. Right, Germany had surrendered earlier in the year. Japan surrenders August 15th, 1945, I believe. And so now World War II is over. So our wartime mission is over, but we're not just going to shut the doors and go back to universities and stuff. And so we shifted like immediately to peacetime missions. So remember, I told you that we discovered the neutron in 1932, but we didn't really have a good source of neutrons. There are natural radioactive things all around us. I mean, there's radon in the air, right? Marie Curie helped discover that. You know, there's bananas are radioactive. A tiny amount of potassium is radioactive, and they have a lot of potassium. So bananas famously are radioactive. So we would use naturally radioactive sources to get uraniums for experiments. But we never before had a huge, powerful neutron source that we could turn on and off at will. And so science immediately said, this is an excellent research tool. And so one of the first things, actually Oak Ridge National Laboratory's first research proposal, so the story goes, was Ernie Wolin and Clifford Shull. Well, Ernie Wolin initially, they were doing X-ray diffraction spectroscopy, I think. You had to fact check me on that. As nerdy stuff over my head, but they were doing X-ray experiments in Chicago. And they said, well, now that we have a source of neutrons, could we do that same experimentation with neutrons instead? And so they wrote a research proposal and brought their equipment down, and it did work. But now, instead of just interacting mostly with the electrons of atoms, now we can interact with the nucleus of the atom. And so we can do basically a much deeper analysis of materials. And they actually won. Well, Ernie Wolin sadly passed away beforehand, but I think the 1994 Nobel Prize in Physics went to Clifford Shull for that work. And a lot of the neutron science around the world started really from Ernie Wolin bringing his equipment down here to the X10 graphite reactor. Another thing that we did is isotope production. So isotopes, what is that? Well, it's really just a more descriptive way for us to talk about an atom. Instead of just saying it's iron, we would say exactly how many neutrons it has too. So we call them by the add up the protons and the neutrons. So like iron 59 means you add the protons and neutrons, and there's 59 of them. Uranium 235, add the 92 protons and 143 neutrons, and it's 235. So it's just a more descriptive way of talking about atoms. Well, almost every atom you find on Earth is stable, right? The balance of protons to neutrons is happy. It doesn't just decay radioactively. Almost everything is stable. But now that we can jam more neutrons into the nucleus, we can make them unstable, things that you don't find on Earth, because if you did, they would decay into something stable. And so carbon-14 we made, right? We put natural carbon is almost all carbon 12 and 13. Well, if you put that carbon into the reactor and jam another neutron into it, now it's carbon-14, which is radioactive. And we sent that as early, I think 1946 was the first time we sent radioactive isotopes to the Barnard Free Skin and Cancer Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri. And that was really the start of nuclear medicine. We could make them before using the natural radioactivity, but we never had production levels of medical isotopes until after, our peacetime mission after the war.
I need to insert here that Alvin Weinberg, who was the director of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory for what, I think 15 years, before he passed away, he was asked, what's the most important thing Oak Ridge has ever done for the world? Without any hesitation, he said nuclear radioisotopes, nuclear medicine, helps millions of people every year. Same science, same equipment, even the calutrons at Y12 separated some of those stable isotopes that came over to the graphite reactor, were made radioactive, and produced nuclear medicine. So one of the great things coming out of the graphite reactor was nuclear medicine.
Absolutely. And a lot of the radioactive isotopes that we make, a lot of these radioactive materials that we make, help us every day more than just medicine. So of course it's if you get a PET scan, okay, they put radioactive material in you and then they can scan you, help find cancer and stuff like that. They can put actinium inside of you to attack the cancer. There's lots of medical, there's really a lot of medical uses for it, but also we inspect welds with it. It's a little bit like taking an x-ray of your body, but x-rays aren't powerful enough to look at the inside of a weld on a bridge or an airplane. And so we use radioactive isotopes to do those basically x-rays and see the insides of it to make sure the welds are good. Things where weld failure is not acceptable. And so we inspect every weld, with that. NASA uses isotopes to power Voyager Curiosity, Perseverance, the upcoming Dragonfly. So isotopes are used for many, many things. They help us in ways that a lot of times we don't even realize around us all the time. Another thing I'd love to show you, Ray, one of your favorite things. Actually, this might be a perfect time for me to walk around a little bit. Is that okay?
Sure.
Go ahead to it.
Okay, I'm going to mute this so we don't.
Keep working it. Keep working it. You hadn't gotten that sound yet.
Oh, sorry. I should have had it already pulled up. I'm going to show you one of the first things I'm going to show you is going to be if you Google the world's first nuclear power generated electricity, you probably find Idaho National Laboratory's reactor EBR-1. But I have, I think, one of Ray's favorite exhibits here at the reactor, which happened years before. If I can get my phone to pull up. I pulled it up earlier, but then I closed it. I should have kept it open.
That's always the case. Your phone reception's not good there in the reactor building, probably.
Yeah, no, I practiced this before. I cannot go in the control room at all. I mean, it's basically a metal box, and I will lose you.
I've noticed that too.
Well, maybe it's not going to work. So
Okay.
I'll tell you about it. So years before, Idaho National Laboratory did their experiment where they had a reactor, which remember I said it's just a really hot source of heat. They created steam and turned a steam turbine, which powered a generator and powered electricity. Well, we had a couple of really clever guys who decided their kid or something had like a toy steam engine for, like, if they were a train hobbyist, you know, you might get this for your kid, and a little steam engine turns a little generator and lights up a little light bulb. And they said, well, a reactor is really hot, so let's put some water in there. It'll make some steam, send it out, and it turned that little steam engine and lit up that little light bulb. Now, I will give it to them. Idaho National Laboratory lit up a whole facility, and I think maybe even the whole town later after, and we only lit up a light bulb. But first is first, and it was right here.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Now, some other things we did have. Okay, so I told you about the front to back tubes. We put the fuel, and I told you about the top to bottom and some of the side to side ones that had the control rods absorbing neutrons. Well, we also had, thankfully, the scientists and engineers were clever enough to put side to side tubes through there where we can put really anything we want. And inside the reactor, there's many, many, many extra neutrons, not necessarily needed for the fission chain reaction. And so that's kind of how we make, like, for instance, carbon-14. We put the carbon-13 in there, and then it absorbs one of those extra neutrons. We could put all kinds of things in there and test them out. And so we did material testing for originally for Hanford reactor. You know, you can see some of these water cooling tubes. How does a neutron radiation flux affect stainless steel tubes and water flowing through it so that they could cool their reactors well? But we can also do all kinds of experiments on materials to see inside of them, basically those x-rays. And so we can see inside of crystals and do basic science, even engine components. So car manufacturers would come and they'd put, like, their pistons in here or their piston sleeves, put them in the reactor, and they become slightly radioactive. So now they go put it in their testing facility in the engine, and they turn the engine on and they monitor the oil to see if the radiation comes into the oil. And if it does, they know the pistons are wearing, because all that radioactive piston should stay on the piston. But if it's too much friction, they'll get those radioactive isotopes in the oil. So we did all kinds of testing. Another thing that we did, the Navy was looking at nuclear propulsion for submarines as early as 1940. Actually, they were doing thermal diffusion enrichment as early as 1940 at the Naval Research Laboratory. Well, right after the war, they sent famously Captain Rickover, Hyman Rickover, eventually Admiral Rickover, to Oak Ridge to look at, hey, what do we really need to do to put a nuclear reactor on a submarine? Because they're most vulnerable when they have to come up to the surface and recharge their batteries. Most submarines were diesels, but a nuclear submarine can stay down until you run out of fuel, really, or I mean, until you run out of food. So you're only limited really by your food. So he came here and learned at our reactor school. Actually, Alvin Weinberg was one of his instructors. You talked about Alvin Weinberg being our longest serving lab director of the lab. And there were a lot of different reactor technologies, between pressurized water, boiling water, liquid salt, liquid metal reactors. And Alvin Weinberg convinced Rickover that a pressurized water reactor would be the best bet. And that's why he went off and did pressurized water reactors for the Navy. Today, all of the Navy's submarines and aircraft carriers are powered by nuclear reactors. Only some of the submarines have nuclear weapons, but all of them are powered by a nuclear reactor that gives them propulsion electricity. And actually, Rickover helped develop the first civilian power plant at Shippingport, the Shippingport nuclear power plant. And so you can pretty well contribute all of today's America's reactor plants back to Rickover and Weinberg deciding that pressurized water reactors are the best bet. And that's why a lot of future reactors look at other designs because, okay, that's the one that they like the best, but maybe there are better, safer, more advanced ones. Well, the Navy.
It's a good point to mention that Alvin Weinberg was a strong proponent of molten salt.
Yeah.
And eventually that has come full circle. Now molten salt is a very highly desired approach to nuclear reactors. So
really,
right.
Yeah. And molten salt really is only possible because, or it can only be successful in the future because a lot of the material testing that we've done here at Oak Ridge and elsewhere in the country to determine corrosion characteristics in a molten salt and how does radiation affect it and all that stuff. And so that's a good point. Actually, Oak Ridge National Laboratory has had 13 reactors. We're looking at the first one. And right now we only have one still operating, the high flux isotope reactor, which has been online since 1965, thankfully, and looks to be going on for the foreseeable future past my lifetime. But we have had at least 2 molten salt reactors. And actually, this perfect segue because after the Navy got their reactors, the Nautilus launched in 1955, the first nuclear powered submarine, the Air Force came and said, we want nuclear powered aircraft.
Yes.
And the legend goes that they came to Alvin Weinberg and said, we want a nuclear powered aircraft. And he said, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Because think about how much shielding you need. They're so heavy, you'll never get it off the ground. And the Air Force said, well, we had about $1 billion to study this. And Weinberg said, on second thought, maybe we should look into this.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, we never got a nuclear powered aircraft off the ground, but it was the first molten salt reactor, as far as I'm aware, anywhere in the world, definitely the first one at Oak Ridge. And so it went on to influence our next reactor, which was the molten salt reactor experiment, and informs a lot of the reactors of today. And a lot of the research that went into that helps us as a society in general anyways, even though we never got a nuclear powered aircraft off the ground. And one of the best examples is in the 70s, we had that energy crisis, thought the world was going to run out of oil. And one of the ways that we could conserve oil worldwide was getting better fuel efficiency for our cars. We'd done a lot of experiments into strong, lightweight materials for this aircraft. And so we transferred that technology or that materials knowledge to the automotive industry. And today's cars are much lighter and safer and get better fuel efficiency. So that's just one example of how even research that didn't come to its original conclusion can still benefit society today.
Which really, to be quite honest, happens a lot. I mean, the history of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory is filled with those kinds of stories where something didn't suit its original purpose, but it was discovered it could help somewhere else. So,
for sure.
And you might add that the remaining evidence of that nuclear aircraft can be seen from I-40 as you're driving east. If you look north, you'll see 2 towers. A tower shielding reactor is still standing. I don't know how much longer it's going to be there, but it is still there today. If you look just after you pass Galahar Road and before you get to Highway 95, you can actually see the 2 towers of the tower shielding reactor.
I'm going to have to check that out because I didn't know that. I've seen pictures, but
You can see it. You got to look quick though, because it don't stay there very long.
That's very cool. So a lot of another thing that we did. So all this is these 18 years of peacetime use, right? We had 2 years of wartime mission, and then we shifted right away to peacetime use. We also did a lot of the biological testing on radiation. You know, Marie Curie famously died because she carried radium around her neck in a necklace. We didn't know that radiation was so harmful to humans. You know, eventually we started to figure it all out, but now that we had a source of you could turn on and off whenever you want, powerful neutrons and other radiation, then we could really do a lot more testing. And so we thankfully don't do any of this today because we pretty well figured it out. But we did do animal testing here, and we knew about alpha, beta, gamma, and neutron radiation before we created the reactor, but they didn't really know if there were going to be more radiation types that we'd never seen or heard of or thought of. So we actually had animals in cages all around site up to a mile away. And thankfully, there was never any harm to them because we had figured out all the types of radiation. There was no unknown. But a lot of the biological testing to know how does it affect you, you know, and it influences the medical industry today. We're able to fight a lot of cancers with radiation because of the testing that happened right here at X10. You know, another thing like radiation affects your cells more if they're rapidly reproducing. So for instance, it affects your hair more than your brain, you know, because it's reproducing more quickly. Well, it turns out fetuses are reproducing very rapidly, the cells are. And so pregnant women typically don't get x-rays because of some of the research that came here from this reactor. We learned how it influenced, and that makes us safer today. We also, in the biological studies, found that the, oh goodness, I hope I don't get this wrong, the Y chromosome is, you know, affects maleness. You can have as many X chromosomes as you want, and it'll always be female, but then you get a Y chromosome and now, you know, male. So all that is biological research that happened right here at the graphite reactor.
Yeah.
Oh, let me ask a question. Let's go back to the physical graphite reactor.
Yeah.
How big is it inside? And
yeah, absolutely.
Besides those tubes, what's inside?
Yeah, absolutely. So a question might come, why graphite? What does that even mean? So to the size question, it's 24 foot. It's a cube, 24 foot by 24 foot by 24 foot of graphite. So that's how big it is.
Okay.
Now
so it's graphite filled.
It is built out of graphite blocks like Legos, and there's holes in the graphite where the tubes go through. Now, when neutrons come out of fission, right? Fission, the atom splits and a few neutrons come out. They're going very, very quickly. And in order to have this reaction happen how we want it, we need to slow them down considerably to what we call thermal. We want a thermal neutron or a slow one. Mm-hmm. And so the best way to do that at the time, we knew that heavy water would be better, but we just didn't have the methods to make heavy water, was graphite. And so a neutron, if you notice, these tubes are actually 8 inches apart from each other. And so a neutron will leave the tube so an atom splits in the tube, in the fuel. A neutron leaves it bounces around in the graphite, giving its energy to the graphite. Then it gets to the next tube and it's already slowed down and it causes another fission. So that's kind of why it's like this. Why did we put them so far apart? Because we needed to slow down the neutrons on the way. So we're looking at 7 foot of 7 foot of concrete on all sides. That gives us the radiation shielding. And then I said it's air cooled. And so just on the other side of this concrete is actually a big air gap. And so that's like the air inlet. We had huge blowers that would draw air in through the air gap. Then it would go through the tubes and out the other side where there's an air gap, and then it would leave the building and go out a 200-foot tall exhaust stack. Mm-hmm. So of course we're putting in 4-inch tubes, and I just told you on the other side of the concrete is a 3-foot gap. So obviously as soon as you push a tube in, it's going to fall into that space. So there were stainless steel tubes that went from this concrete over, bridged the gap to the graphite. So when I push those little canisters in, they go through that stainless steel tube until they get into the graphite.
That's the best explanation I've ever heard.
Thank you.
That reactor is actually constructed. I think that is really good. Keith, we've got a good understanding of the graphite reactor now.
Absolutely. I mean, this is
Good.
I think we found somebody that could help us reach a new audience.
I
It was
agree.
very engaging. I would show this to my students. As a matter of fact, I'm going to recommend it to our science teacher to show in his class when he
Good.
Thank you
talks
very much.
about that. So, but yeah, it was a great explanation and
Is it,
a great history lesson.
yeah, thank you. Is it okay to talk? Do I have time to talk a little bit about the future of ORNL maybe?
Sure,
Sure.
please do. Yeah, we've got a couple more minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, so I work in the isotope directorate. So Oak Ridge National Laboratory does many excellent science things for the nation and the world. Most of my expertise is in isotope production because that's where I work. And so, like I said, we're making plutonium for NASA, which is going towards the Dragonfly mission. I'm really excited about that because I've had my hands on some of that plutonium.
Plutonium 238, right?
It is. Okay, that's a good point. Okay, so we talked about plutonium for weapons. That's a different isotope. It has a different number of neutrons. So plutonium 239 is what they use for weapons. Plutonium 238, it's not very good at fission, but it is physically hot. It is like temperature hot. And so NASA uses that heat that it generates to generate electricity for its space probes and rovers and stuff. So they're going to send a quadcopter to Titan, which is a moon of Saturn, and it's going to explore Titan by flying around, and that's going to be powered by the plutonium 238 that we made. So that's exciting.
And how long will that last?
So yeah. So plutonium, well, all radioactive things, when we talk about how long they last, we talk in half-lives. So however much of it you have, how long does it take until you only have half of that? And so plutonium 238, the half-life, I think, is about 80 years. Maybe it might be like 79 or 81, but it's about 80 years. So however much we put on Voyager, for instance, we sent it out into space 80 years from when it launched, which I think was in the 70s, it has half as much. And so it's generating less electricity, which this is not my field of expertise, but I think what they do actually, because it's decayed so much now, they shut down some of the electronics on Voyager in order to conserve power for important things to send a message back. And once it's done, they can power the other things on because it has decayed. It doesn't last forever. It gets less hot over time. Yeah.
Sure.
Another thing that seems to be a really, really big thing lately, apparently it's worth more than gold by weight, is actinium-225, because among other things, it is very effective at treating non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer. And I hope I said that right. I'm an isotope maker. I'm not a doctor, but I've heard it enough. I think that's what it is. And they just found it is like super effective at that. And so we're ramping up production, not only at Oak Ridge, but across the nation. We're looking at not only, hey, we make it, but how can we get other sources of it, maybe old radium, stuff like that. And so that's what we're really leaning into medical isotopes. I mean, as geopolitics has made a huge isotope producer of Russia not necessarily available to the Western world anymore.
Right.
The nation and the world is looking increasingly to other places for isotopes, including Oak Ridge. And then lastly, a tiny plug for myself, a project that I hope takes off, but we'll see, is just like y'all said, you kind of like the way that I explained that. I don't know why people like the way I talk, but they're going to do a nuclear learning series, I guess, on the Oak Ridge National Laboratory YouTube channel, as long as they turn out good enough. And so I'm really excited to teach nuclear to a general audience in a way that's understandable, not dumbing it down, but just making it understandable. You know, I love talking to my family and friends back home about what nuclear really is, how it benefits us all the time in ways that we don't even realize. And so I really hope that series takes off and hopefully helps people in Oak Ridge even learn about what nuclear is, as all these, I think 11 companies are bringing $14 billion into Oak Ridge for nuclear, something like that.
Yeah.
I would love to help my fellow citizens understand what these things really are.
I think that is an excellent idea, and I applaud the laboratory for thinking of it and for using you. You do an excellent job of explaining it in such a way that even I can understand it, Keith. So I think that is exciting. I look forward to that Oak Ridge National Laboratory coming on YouTube and talking about the nuclear industry and the nuclear aspect of it in a very understandable way. You're the best I've ever seen doing that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's hard to see. I record myself sometimes and I don't see what y'all see, but I appreciate it.
Oh, you
Well,
did, you did good.
I've spent my career. Uh, I'm proud of the fact that I can spot talent. So yeah, so and you've got it. So there
Oh,
you
too
go.
kind.
Uh, Ray,
Uh,
before
yeah.
we leave, real quick, um, we're finalizing plans, and I want to go ahead and promote this. We're finalizing plans for December the 6th
Right.
at the American Museum of Science and Energy, sometime in the afternoon.
4 o'clock, I believe,
Is
right?
it going to be 4 o'clock?
I think that's right.
I think I suggested 2 to 4, but that's all right. We'll let
Okay.
people know later.
We'll figure it out. Yeah.
We're going to have a 20th anniversary screening of the documentary film, The Secret City, The Oak Ridge Story, The War Years. It came out it was released June 15th, 2005. And I was the producer, writer, director. Ray was one of the producers on that. The then mayor, David Bradshaw, was a producer on that, and he has. So we're going to have a screening of it at AMSI, and then have a panel discussion afterwards.
Yeah,
And
and that's where I got my 4 o'clock.
yeah,
The 2 o'clock is the screening of the film. The
yeah.
4 o'clock is the panel discussion. And David Bradshaw doesn't know this yet, but he's going to be one of our panel
Oh no,
members.
he does know it. That's what I was
Oh,
about to
does
say.
he?
I reached out to David, and he said he would be free that day and would love to participate. So
It's going to be fun.
so yeah, it's hard to believe that it was 20 years ago when that came out, and I knew very little about the nuclear industry when I made that film, and I can say I hadn't learned much in 20 years, but it seems that way anyway.
Yeah, but you didn't have Jacob. We got Jacob now.
Yeah,
That's
we'll fix
true.
that.
That is true. Now, to be quite honest, I don't know how many of the folks that we interviewed for that film will be there, because I don't think there's hardly any of them left besides Ray and maybe a few others. But hopefully, we can get a new generation out to learn the history of Oak Ridge.
That'll be good.
Yeah,
All
for
right.
sure.
Now we've got our next one in a couple of weeks. Ray, who do we have?
Yeah, we've got Jim Dotson, who's a art teacher at Jefferson Middle School and also a city councilman for the city of Oak Ridge. He's also the president of the American Museum of Science and Energy Foundation, and he loves art, especially around the town. And we want him to talk a little about the various art displays that we have in Oak Ridge and to talk a little about the future as he sees it of our having art in the city. So I think we've got Oak Ridge is I believe, on the verge of tremendous growth in population. And Jacob just mentioned 11 companies. I think there's probably 12 now, with
Yeah.
Radiant announcing just this last week. But
Oh,
yeah, they're coming into town, bringing in billions of dollars. A large, I think, ramp up in Oak Ridge in all ways. We are, as the mayor says, great things happen in Oak Ridge every day.
yeah, Mayor Gooch.
Yeah, Mayor Gooch says that.
Yeah,
And
right.
I
Yeah.
think we're on the verge of that. And one of that aspects will be what Jim will talk to us about on the art, displaying art in the city.
Yeah, Ray, to comment, you're right. There's a lot of enthusiasm going on for the new, this Manhattan Project 2.0, the nuclear renaissance that Oak Ridge is going through, and a good example of that enthusiasm is people that watch this know that I was a filmmaker for 40 years, and 5 years ago I decided to teach high school. So I teach video production in Kingston. And our very first day back to school this year, they arranged to take every teacher in Roane County on a tour of Oak Ridge facilities to let us understand what was coming,
Yep.
and to help us prepare help prepare the future for our students in a nuclear renaissance in this region. So, I mean, they're starting with those kinds of things. They're going to need a workforce, and these kids are going to be their workforce in the future.
Exactly right.
So anyway.
Exactly right. All right.
All right.
Very good.
Very
Thanks
good.
again, Jacob, for being with us today. It was an excellent program.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. All right, folks, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks in another Hidden History.